Bible.
So what do you do with the so-called difficult sections of the Bible? So the case that, to play devil's advocate for a second, and obviously it's interesting to do this because you and I agree about the veracity of at least the first half of the Bible. We have a disagreement on where to file the New Testament. You put it in the nonfiction section, and I don't. I'm Jewish. So, but with that said, and we'll get to those disagreements in just a second. I'd be remiss if we didn't. But to take the difficult sections of the Bible, Sam Harris makes the case that, and I use Sam, but Richard Dawkins does the same thing. People who sort of have a cursory glance at the Bible, read it once through on their nightstand at a hotel, and now are experts. And I don't mean to be dismissive, but I do. But the idea is that they will pick out a section that is particularly awkward, and they will say, okay, well, the Bible was fine with this. So what's the deal? So let's do a couple of those sections, if you don't mind. So let's take slavery. This is the example that's very often used, is that the Bible is okay with slavery. There are particular sections in the Old Testament that specifically talk about, for example, taking female captives and then shaving their heads and then marrying them, forcing them into marriage. How do we square this with the basic sense of Western morality now, which is that slavery is a terrible evil? How could the Bible why didn't the Bible just abolish slavery 3,000 years ago?
Well, first of all, the Bible would never condone taking women as slaves, shaving their heads, and turning them into some kind of abject slavery. That would never be advocated. The Old Testament elevates women, obviously. So does the New Testament. But let's talk about slavery. The Bible never condones mistreating anyone, not even an animal. The Bible never condones mistreating anyone. I want to make that very clear. The Bible calls for love and kindness and support and encouragement and protection and provision. One of the social constructs in which that occurred in the purposes of God was a form of slavery. The word, and the fact that slavery and being a servant were so close shows in the word ebed, which could mean both. Which is to say that the only difference between being a servant who showed up in the morning at 9 o'clock and left at 6 and being a slave was you lived, you had been purchased. What that meant was you had food, you had family, you had protection, you had provision. This was for many people the most secure kind of employment they could have ever hoped for, with a good master, with a faithful master, with a loving master. And in the New Testament, fascinating, the New Testament word for slave is doulos, and it's the equivalent to ebed in the Old Testament, but doulos is the word for slave, and it is used dozens of times to refer to a Christian. When we confess Jesus as Lord, we are saying, He is kurios, Lord, I am doulos, His slave. I can't think of a more wonderful relationship that any human being could ever have than to be the slave of one who loved and died for him, who provided everything he or she would ever need, who promises eternal protection, eternal blessing, who raises that slave to become a son, adopts that slave into his family, and makes him a joint heir of everything he possesses in the eternal kingdom. So just taking the concept of slave and turning it into some kind of a pejorative thing misses the point that there were lots of social constructs. Some of the safest places people could be in the ancient world would be with a master who loved them and cared for them. The Bible explicitly rejects any mistreatment of slaves ever. They are to be treated with kindness and love in a way that honors God and demonstrates care for them. Now, that's very different, that kind of thing, than transporting people across an ocean, putting them in chains, making them basically nothing but an elevated animal, if even elevated. That the Bible would never tolerate.